and welcome to Beating a Dead Horse. I'm Sean McKinda.
And I'm Jackson Keller.
And this week we're going to be talking about Earthbound. I meant Undertale. It's the same game in a lot of ways.
Hey, now be fair. There's a lot of Mother 3 in there too.
Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. We do need to. We'll encompass the entirety of Mother. No, Undertale is, for as much grief as we are going to give this game, absolutely fantastic. It is an enjoyable romp full of interesting choices, moral quandaries that Earthbound doesn't have. It borrows heavily from Earthbound, and since that is in both mine and Jackson's top favorite games, it's hard for us to sometimes separate ourselves from our love from it. So we're gonna do a lot of comparison and ragging on it, but
it's true. I would also like to say that we're timing this episode with the release of Rise 4, and I believe on the Vita port of the game. So I'm not, but I think it's going on the Vita. If you're someone who, for some reason, is listening to this podcast and has not played Undertale yet, and you were waiting for that port, I would honestly recommend, this is a pretty common recommendation for this game, that you go in as blind as possible. So if you're looking for just a yay or a nay, definitely yay.
Yeah, as I said, we were going to rag on this, but we both really, really like this game. You should absolutely play it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of the more discussed, one of the more influential, maybe not even influential is the right word for it, because I haven't seen a ton of like rip-offs or anything, but definitely has earned its place as kind of the big indie game of it came out like 2015, and it's still really resonating. I think it's held up as something that is important quite well, and I think there's a good reason for that. So yeah, like I said, despite my problems with how liberally this game steals from Earthbound and the other Mother games, it definitely has its own take on things. There's a lot to discuss. It's got great characters, and it's absolutely worth playing, like, as blind as possible. Though, again, it's been 2 years, and this is one of the most discussed indie games, so there probably aren't that many people who don't know what the deal is by now, but just in case.
Yeah, and it is one of those games, too, that I can recommend to people who don't often play video games as well. I don't think it is especially hard, and it ramps up difficulty in a slow enough way that if there is any tough spots, by the time you get to it, you should be able to handle it. So even if you're not normally a video game player, the campaign runs you about 8 to 10 hours, so it's not a huge time commitment. I know on PC it's only $10, and on PS4 it is running $15. We are not getting paid to say this, but you should totally go pick it up. It's well worth playing, and it's, even as I said, even if you're not into video games, go play it. That being said, without getting into spoilers, let's kind of give into a little bit of a discussion on why we have such complex feelings about this game.
Complex. So for starters, I think, just speaking for myself, coming at Undertale the first time, it's sort of hard to appreciate Undertale as just a game when by the time I had played it, it was already kind of a phenomenon. Like, there was already all that drama about it winning, like, the best game ever poll, like, Game FAQs. Like, it already had a lot of hype around it. A lot of stuff that might even be considered spoilers got to the point where it was, like, common knowledge. Like, the game came out, when I first heard about Undertale, it was because my friend, who is really into the indie game scene a lot, and he just sent me a link saying, hey, it was before the game was released, actually. It's like, hey, check out this Kickstarter. This is something that I'm really excited for, and I think knowing your taste, you would be too. And I didn't get around to it for one reason or another until it had already become famous, and by that point, you get the expectations of the hype, whether those are feelings that it's going to be like the best game ever versus expecting it to not be as good as everyone is making it out to be, and it just kind of, it sets you down a certain road. And while I very much enjoyed Undertale, it very much is my type of game. Very character-driven, kind of a big adventure game. Takes a lot of, like, JRPG stuff. There was also problems, some of which are pretty spoilery, so I'll have to hold off on and talk more about my first run through later. But mostly it just came down to feeling like the game kind of cheats on some of its themes, and also, like we mentioned, stealing very, very liberally from Earthbound. And I know that one of the things about art is that you synthesize your influences when you're like a writer or any kind of artist, game designer, whatever, and that's going to show up in your work, because what the art you consume is what shapes you as an artist. But you can take it too far. And when you're lifting lines of dialogue from Earthbound and just putting them in the game, that's when it starts to become a problem.
I would have argued at one point that I think copying straight from Earthbound or stealing straight from Earthbound would have been too harsh of a term, just because there is definitely some, you can see influences from Earthbound on this game. And for good reason. Earthbound is a fantastic game. It deserves to be referenced in an influencing factor in more video games.
Yeah, if anything, maybe games could take more from Earthbound than they currently do. But that's neither here nor there.
There's some really good mechanics that should have been a staple in every JRPG, but yeah, it's pointless to talk about. But there's a difference between an homage where such and such says something, or like even if there was a throwaway line, but nobody came is a huge line in Earthbound, and it's a line that shows up repeatedly in Undertale as well. And it's because they mean different things in different games, but just the prevalence of it in both of them rings hollow to me. And it felt more like lifting and less like an homage. And that's probably the easiest, least spoilery way to explain our mixed feelings in regards to how it homages Earthbound. There's just little things like that. And if you have never played Earthbound, which I know a lot of people haven't, it's a huge cult game, but doesn't necessarily have the overwhelming following that Undertale does. Most people aren't going to notice this. Most people aren't going to care about this. Most people won't realize it. So if you haven't, you're going to love this game even more.
That's a good... I didn't even think about that. Yeah, more people probably have played Undertale than Earthbound. That's kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, I remember when this came out, talking to people about elements of the game and just been like, yeah, it's just straight from Earthbound. I'm like, I've never played it. I don't have that frame of reference. So to me, this is brand new, totally wild, and totally awesome. And it is hipster and looking down my nose as this is going to sound, it was kind of frustrating just because of how much I love Earthbound is honestly what it boils down to. And it's just going to keep coming back to that, especially in this intro section, on just how much we fucking adore Earthbound because it's such a good game.
Yeah, as I'm recording this, I am staring at amiibos of Ness and Lucas like side by side with each other. I just realized that, like, it's just sitting on my desk. Let's keep talking about Undertale for a bit before this goes too off the rails. Specifically, as far as, because the again, I don't want to say theft, because aside from that one line of dialogue, there isn't that much that it straight up steals from Earthbound. But let's just say the heavy homage element wasn't my only frustration with Undertale. In general, it's very good at characters. Undertale has very good characters. They've become like pretty iconic for a reason, and not like Ubisoft iconic, not like Aiden Pierce's iconic cap. Like, you know, people know the skeletons, people know Goat Mom. Like they're very for good, and they know them for good reason, because they're very interesting characters once you kind of look at them on a bit under the surface. Like, there's more to them that meets the eye, but as far as their interactions with you, they're just very fun. Like, it's just a very fun game. And a lot of that is due to the humor, which I feel like comes in a few different flavors in this game, and makes the effectiveness, I mean, humor is of course totally subjective, but for me it makes the effectiveness a bit uneven, especially when it comes to like the last half of the game. So basically, for me, the first half of the game up until a certain fight, I guess without getting into too much spoils, after the waterfall section, when you start going to Lava Land, so about the halfway point, that first half of the game I was totally into. I thought it was doing a lot of interesting things with tone. Characters are great. Just completely on board with it. And then after that, I think it lost me a bit. Not totally, but part of that was just because of the humor, which, again, basically the three flavors are, one, kind of just like your general like character interaction humor, like the comedy comes from certain character traits like playing off against one another. I think the strongest part of the game humor-wise is the intro section with Sans and Papyrus, the skeletons, precisely for this reason. Those are really fun characters, and they play off each other and the protagonist and kind of the mechanics of video games very well. So that stuff is pretty consistently great. The second kinder is like what I'd say is the Earthbound styled humor. And it's sort of, if you haven't played Earthbound, it's sort of hard to describe. But if you have, you know exactly what I mean. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's different from what I would call the third kind of humor that you can kind of like wrap up into a neat little bow, and that there's a lot of references and a lot of stuff that does potato. The just like random like potato is like just saying stuff out loud in like a weird voice. There's a lot of like faces that remind me, the art design, although the art is usually pretty good, a lot of like the times when the characters will make like a funny face reminds me of like a bad webcomic.
Oh god, yeah, no, I got like early Rage comics from it. I got goofy webcomic. The random stuff is really what does the most damage to this game. I could get past a lot of the Earthbound quote-unquote homages and some of the other smaller issues, but there's something about kind of random goofy humor that just pulls me out of whatever I am doing and throws me back to when I was 14 and just buries myself in a wave of embarrassment that I just don't want to play it anymore and I don't want to watch it anymore. And yeah, that's kind of a personal problem I have no shame in admitting, but
well, humor's very subjective, you know? Like we were saying earlier, like for some people that's the funniest stuff in the game, and you know, that's fine. Like I'm not going to rag on someone for thinking like I know you brought up the Temmies without going into like what or where they are as spoilers, but the Temmies are a big element as something that jumped out at you, and like I know a lot of people think the Temmies are hilarious, and that's fine, but it's just like I don't really.
Yeah, I mean, we're not here to tell you shouldn't find these things funny. If you do, I am thrilled for you. I would much rather be able to find everything funny than nothing funny, because I mean, one of those things sounds like a good way to live life. The other one sounds like I'm a crotchety old man, and I am. So enjoy what you enjoy. Don't let us tell you not to, please, ever. Like, that is the one thing that I never want to do, is tell you not to enjoy something. So enjoy your Temmies. Enjoy them.
Enjoy your Temmies. But the Temmies kind of notwithstanding, as far as, because I agree, it didn't kill my enthusiasm for the game that much on its own, but I do think it does create some tonal problems. And that Undertale, when Undertale is serious, when Undertale gets real, I think it's really good. And not just in kind of the more famous ways, but just in terms of like the character drama of like all the monsters feeling like trapped in the underground, because that's kind of like where the premise of the game starts off. That after the war, this race of monsters got like sealed into the underground, and kind of the characters like trying to live like good lives. You can tell it's like taking a toll on people being trapped in this like claustrophobic place. And then like the bosses, like the big bosses, the first area and like the last area, and basically like the very first one, the very last one, and the middle one, you can kind of divide this game into five-ish sections, I'd say, based on each like major boss you fight. It's I think those three areas, the bookends in the middle are all really, really solid, like really genuinely interesting as far as like a serious story goes. The second section with the goofy skeletons, I think, is where the humor and stuff is working best, and then it plays with the tone in kind of a nice, like, smart way, where you think the game kind of sets you up to think it's going to be about one thing, and then the goofy skeletons happen, and it kind of throws you for a loop, and it's a bit delightful. I think really for me that fourth area, which has a lot of stuff that I like, has some jokes and some other even some like character drama moments that I like, but that's where
it also has some of the best music in the game, in a game that has some of the best music I have ever heard.
The music in this game, yeah, I mean, Undertale's soundtrack is a fucking 10 out of 10, like, no question. And that section, it feels a bit like filler sometimes, and it feels very at odds with the rest of the game. Like, it feels like it starts introducing a bunch of jokes. I think specifically for Sean, it was the Temmies. For me, there's like this nerdy character, who actually has like an interesting backstory, but like all you see of her at first is like she constantly calls you on the phone to basically make a bunch of not even anime references, but like jokes about people who watch anime, like the anime community, and they're just so weirdly specific. Especially after, and I know that there's like a in-universe justification for like why they keep fucking talking about anime, but it rings hollow to me, especially after the first like half of the game was so strong, and then the last half of the game it pretty much disappears. Not the last half, but like the last little sliver of it before the final boss. I think we're starting to brush against what we can talk about without getting into spoilers, and we haven't touched upon death yet in this death podcast for a very good reason.
Before we get into spoilers, I'm going to kind of give you guys a quick rundown of the game just so you have an idea on what it's about. I really recommend that if you've liked what we've talked about so far, and what I'm about to explain sounds really good, you go play it. I recommend you play it anyway, honestly, but especially after this. Following that, we are going to dive into spoilers, and there's a lot to talk about, so come back for that for sure. If you don't care, just keep listening. Undertale is a pseudo JRPG. It is all pixel animated. It has some of the best soundtrack you will ever listen to. It is very character driven, very dialogue focused, and has a very unique way of telling a story and a very non-conventional way of doing battles. They are very personal and very interactive in ways that most JRPGs aren't. As the tagline suggests, this is a friendly RPG where no one has to die, which is incredibly unique in the RPG spectrum. That being said, let's start talking spoilers. And I warn you, it's gonna be a wild ride.
Yeah, Undertale is a bit of a complex beast to talk about, to say the least, due in part to how many endings there are, and like how many approaches, how many small things that aren't even ending will change. Like, it's a very I will say this, for any shit I gave the game earlier about, like, you know, its sense of humor, its handling of tone, I can only applaud it for just how ambitious it is. And I think it deserves a lot of credit for trying a lot of unique things, even if, again, I don't think they entirely land. So basically, I'm going to take a minute to define some terms here, just because I know that in the fandom even, nobody can really agree on what to call the various runs, and I, don't really have much of a dog in that fight, but just for the purposes of clarity, I'm going to spell out how I'm going to use each term. So to start off with, you have three main different runs, which I will call the neutral run, the pacifist or the true pacifist run, to usually differentiate it from a pacifist neutral, but I might just default to pacifist, and then the genocide run. So the neutral run is the one with the most permutations. This is any run of the game basically that isn't the true pacifist or the genocide. Usually what that means is a run where somebody died in some form. And where you killed a character. You can also get a neutral ending by just completing the game the first time without killing anybody and not doing the... There's a little bit of extra work that goes into getting the true pacifist ending, because you need to befriend certain characters and take certain actions. So it's possible to get a neutral ending even though you spared everyone. So basically, neutral runs the whole gamut from you killed all the bosses, you didn't kill any of the bosses, but you killed all the mooks. Even if you killed everyone that you ran into, that still might be a neutral ending, even though that sounds like the genocide ending, but I'm going to make another distinction there. So, a lot of different neutral endings. Really, there are only basically two that really matter to us, and we'll go into a bit there. But the true pacifist ending of the game is what it implies, what I would consider like the true ending of the game. This is where you befriend everyone, this is where you spare everyone, this is where the real final boss shows his face. You get a complete rundown of like the lore and the backstory, and it's your big old grand happy ending. This is what most games would consider like the complete ending. However, Undertale is not most games, because as is infamous now, there is one more ending, the genocide ending, and I should clarify that I only found out that you had to take a pretty specific set of actions to do this, because I actually planned to play through Undertale twice in preparation for this podcast. I was going to do the true pacifist and the genocide ending. I actually didn't end up being able to do the genocide ending because I didn't do it properly and actually like ran out of time before we were set to record. So the genocide ending requires you to not just kill everyone you meet. It requires you to go out of your way to level grind in an area like you would in a JRPG and kill like 30 or so enemies in every area until the random encounters will literally stop throwing enemies at you. And then at that point, the dialogue, the way characters will treat you, will change significantly. Towns will be empty because they're fleeing from your presence. You're basically treated as like Godzilla at that point. And for the Undertale fans, like, yes, this is the one I'm talking about where you fight Sans at the end. And lastly, kind of the last term I'm going to use to describe sort of my experience trying to get the genocide ending and failing, is the No Mercy run, where you don't go out of your way to level grind, but you kill everyone you meet anyway. So the game plays out as normal. You're not getting the genocide like Godzilla treatment, but the tone's a little bit darker. All the characters who you like befriend, the major characters, they're all dead. But otherwise the ending isn't like the genocide ending where the special like meta interactions happen. This just plays out like another standard ending. But I did want to make that distinction between the No Mercy and the genocide route. So hopefully you were able to follow all that. But just so we're clear, it's going to be talking about 4 different routes for the most part. Regular old neutral route, kind of what I and both me and Sean did for our first run. The true pacifist route, which I completed. The genocide ending, which I did not. And then the No Mercy route, which I also did not, because I then went and looked up a Let's Play the genocide ending.
There's a lot to cover, and I'm actually going to jump in here, and I'm going to add another layer of things that we should talk about before we start talking about the game. This is going to be a long episode. I'm going to tell you that right now, so buckle up.
Yeah, this will be significantly longer than usual, I would imagine.
But I kind of want to discuss the 3 main players in the game, because this is something that I'm going to do my best to explain, because I had to read like 4 articles to try and fully understand who was who and how they played around with each other. So, the main character, the character that you play as, is known as Frisk. Frisk is a gender-neutral player character. It is the character that you control throughout the game.
To add to that, Frisk is the character in the fiction who falls into the mountain, and they are not necessarily you, as Sean will go on to explain.
Yes. The next person that you should be aware of is yourself, the player. You don't appear in the game directly. However, the player is referenced in multiple occasions. So you are a character within the game despite not being. Finally, and this is where things get really buck wild is the character known as Kara, or Chara, depending on how you want to pronounce it.
However, this character also shares the name that you put in. Kara is just kind of accepted as the default canon name. They will be named, like, for example, if I name my character Jackson, the character's Kara is an entity in the game, but since I put my name in as Jackson, they will refer to them as Jackson.
Yes. So for clarity's sake, we're going to refer to this character as Kara. However, when the game asks you to put a name in, and if you put your name in or whoever, they will be referred to as that name. So Kara kind of acts as the narrator for the game. As you're going through and interacting with monsters, and you try and check what they are, what they like, what they dislike, Kara will narrate that for you, because that person is the first human to fall into the mountain. You, as Frisk, are the 8th? Yes.
Yeah.
You, as Frisk, are the 8th. Kara, however, is not you in real life. You are not acting as Kara. Kara is an intermediary between you and Frisk. And that is the trickiest part to get through, because it is... We're going to get into layers of that. But just keep that in mind. There's you, there's Kara acting as an intermediary between you and Frisk, and there's Frisk, who's the actual character in the game.
Yeah, this game is very postmodern, so buckle up.
With that, though, let's actually start talking about the game.
We've defined our terms, we've identified the characters, we're ready to talk about death on this death podcast.
30 minutes in, we're on a roll. Thankfully, though, Kara doesn't appear in this first discussion we're going to have, because we're going to talk about our first run, which was True Neutral, and probably the worst run that you can do in this game.
Absolutely. In terms of, like, my opinion, if I was going to give it like a game journalism like review score, my first run of Undertale would be a 7 out of 10. In that everything that I said earlier about being charmed by the characters, enjoying the writing, thinking it had a lot of neat ideas, that's all true. But the neutral ending, there's a lot about it that's really dissatisfying, and maybe that's the point. But it doesn't. I felt like at the end, when I finished my neutral run, I was not encouraged to go back and try the others. I just left the game feeling kind of sour about it and feeling like just unsatisfied.
Yeah. There's a lot. This game, depending on which run you end up with, will either encourage you to continue to explore the game in new runs, will actively dissuade you from it, or will kind of leave you just underwhelmed. And I was the exact same as Jackson in that I finished my neutral run and just kind of said, all right, that was good enough. I'm done. And despite the fact that I still recommended people go play it and encourage them to pick it up, I never went back and played it again until we decided to do this podcast in honor of the new release. So the True Neutral is really kind of hard to pin down in a way.
If only because there's so many permutations, but I think so. I guess we can really only talk about our individual experiences with it, and I think there's a couple of things, and a lot of my grievances had to do with death. So, finally we're going to get into that, and that I had an experience with Undertale that was probably, I'm willing to bet, like, I don't have any stats on this, I haven't spent much time like in the forums of the community, but I'm willing to bet was a very common one. In that I went through the whole game, and I maybe killed some mooks at the beginning, and I also killed Toriel, but I didn't do it on purpose. And
Toriel's Goat Mom, who we referred to earlier.
Yep, Toriel's Goat Mom, the first character who kind of leads you around by the hand, and I've got that sequence is a little more understandable in light of the other playthroughs. Like, this is a game that's, if you haven't played and are going to do it, definitely do it at least twice. Like, go for that true pacifist ending, if nothing else. Because the first time going through that whole sequence, the very first time I did it, it was actually like a pretty powerful moment, but it also, I think, just the way that the endings work, the game tells you that it's about your choices having consequences, and we'll get into whether or not that's true, but also it feels like just due to the, and part of this is due to the nature of like game development, like they can't make an elaborate cutscene for every single possible outcome, especially because this is a game made by like one dude, pretty much, like one dude and a few others, I think, which make it all the more impressive. But the problem is that all of the neutral endings consist of a character calling you on the phone and just telling you what happened in the underground, depending on who you did or didn't kill. And not having like a cutscene, not having a proper ending, especially because the final boss of the neutral route is really lame, ended up being really dissatisfying. So, especially when you get into the fact that because you did kill people, you probably got a bad end. And I don't mind in games if I made like a choice. I don't mind getting a bad end as long as it feels like narratively and thematically sound and just follows the conventions of like good drama. But there pretty much is no universe where like you get to the end of this wacky adventure and just a phone call from a character makes you feel like you did something that mattered, basically. So what happened with me, and again, I'm assuming that this is a very common experience, is that you get through the tutorial level and you're introduced to the mechanics of like talking to monsters instead of just killing them, like in other JRPGs. And at the end of the game, and what was actually like not the end of the game, the end of the intro, and what was really a really good sequence, Toriel like really coddles you, like she really wants you to stay with her, like this really sweet character who like bakes you pies. And when you ask her about like, hey, like this is really nice, but I need to go, she gets really serious, and she goes into the basement where there's a door leading to the rest of the underground, and she tells you that she's going to seal it. Like, children come through here all the time. It's always the same. They get killed when they leave. And so, the only way to get past Toriel is to fight her. And I, the first time, killed her, partially because I didn't understand the mechanics, which was kind of irritating in its own way, because one of my problems at first with this game kind of trying to guilt trip you was that there are a lot of games that'll do that. There are a lot of games that'll try and make you feel like a bad person for playing it. Like, it's kind of a minor cottage industry, and there's all sorts of games like plot twists and postmodern elements. Like, I'm thinking particularly of, like, Spec Ops The Line here. But the thing about Spec Ops The Line is that a first-person shooter's interactions are always very clear and correlate to actions in the real world, like, one-to-one. In a first-person shooter or third-person shooter, when you shoot someone in the head, there is no ambiguity about what you've just done to that person. It lines up with the actual art of war really well. Undertale is based off of JRPGs, and if you're trying to guilt trip someone through like turn-based combat, that's very hard because turn-based combat is inherently an abstraction, and And often, like, what turn-based combat means from game to game varies significantly. So it's not like, in a first-person shooter, you shoot someone and they die. In a turn-based combat game, you may, like, hit them with a sword and they might die. Or it might be like the Paper Mario games, where, like, you fight a boss and, like, after stomping on them, they're, like, knocked out with, like, stars over their heads. And it's all, like, played for fun and laughs, and it's all really innocent. So you don't really know. The point is that, like, in a JRPG, defeat does not necessarily equate to death like it does for other genres. So that makes my actions with Toriel pretty much ended up being like I kept trying to talk to her, not using the spare option. I kept trying to use the talk option, which was, in that fight you have to keep using the spare option. And that ended up being my downfall, because I thought, okay, maybe the point of this game is that you can do your best to, like, save people, but, like, maybe sometimes, like, you just have to do it and kind of navigate this world. And so I killed her. I say I killed her on accident, and that's not really totally true. I didn't want to kill her, but I thought that the game, the game was forcing me to. And that was a really sad, powerful moment when she dies, and it's totally clear that she's dead. But it also, again, just because JRPGs are such an abstraction, I felt a little bit uneasy. Not uneasy, not in the way the game wanted me to feel uneasy, but I felt a bit cheated just because it felt like I didn't understand the rules of this world well enough.
Yeah.
In that
early on, there are, like, the fact that I'm sure this happens to a lot of people, though they don't really see that you're supposed to spare Toriel in this one and just keep hitting spare. Because early on, you never encounter a monster where you have to use this mechanic. So there is one reference to coming up soon, you might need to spare someone from the get-go. And it is totally missable if you choose not to talk to this frog, I believe, tells it to you. So if you don't see that, or it's also about 20 minutes before this fight, and a lot happens in between there of just like general mundanity and kind of exploring and seeing what everything's about. It's very easy to not put two and two together there to get spare. So this intro, I guess it works because the first time you play it, you're usually expected to get neutral anyway. But at the same time, it feels shitty for a first-time player, especially if you go into this game knowing that you don't have to kill anybody. And you end up killing Toriel anyway because the mechanics weren't laid out clear enough that you can understand that you can skip her. So this potentially first death that you encounter is a death that doesn't feel warranted almost. It just feels hollow. It feels like you were cheated into having it happen. And there were ways around it, and you were kind of told about them, but not really, especially because this is also the first one where you have to multi-step it. Like before this, you would have to go talk to the frog and tell him he's a good boy, and then you can spare him. And then this one, it's suddenly where you have to sit there and just keep hitting spare to make sure that you don't kill Toriel. And they're just throwing a bunch of new things at you with this fight that it becomes very easy to accidentally / intentionally kill Toriel when you didn't want to. And that feels really cheapening of this death in my eyes.
Same. And there are a couple other things, like, you could say, like, oh, it's your own damn fault for not listening to the tutorial frog. And I could get more behind that if it weren't for a couple other things the game does to basically, like, trick you into killing her. First of all, that same frog will tell you that an enemy will often give up the fight if you can whittle down their health. They explicitly tell you that, like, fighting them is a good way to maybe get them to relent. And so even if you are certain that you can spare Toriel, you might not be certain of the way to do it. And so the fight will cheat when she's down to like a third of her health after you're doing really consistent damage up until that point. I actually had to reset on my True Pacifist run because of this, because I didn't realize for another reason, which option I had to do, is that you keep whittling her down, and then she gets to a third of her health, and then one more hit after a certain point will just knock out the entire health bar. And, like, that doesn't feel sad. Like, I didn't even notice it the first time, because at that point, like, I thought I had to kill her. And when I did think that, like, when I think without this other cheap stuff, like, it would have been a really powerful thing, because after that, like, after feeling the gravity of that, I went and made sure I didn't kill anyone else. Not, like, a single mook, not even, like, a very aggressive character later on, Undyne, who maybe, like, in another circumstance, like, I might have been willing to, like, put down. But since that first fight, I was just like, okay, like, no, we're going to find another way out of this. And I think it would have worked really well from that standpoint. But the other problem is that in addition to kind of just that mechanical cheat of the health getting knocked out from a third, there's also the fact that it presents two different options. The talk action and the spare action. And until that point, all of the mercy options had been done through the talking action. And if you keep hitting that one, nothing happens, even though you're theoretically, like, doing the same thing. Like, sparing someone, they say explicitly, is telling them not to fight. So, but you pretty much have two separate actions in the menu for doing that. One that you've been using the whole time, and the other that you can't. And, yeah, so it feels like the game has to jump through a lot of hoops to make that emotion happen. And I think even just without the, like, I can accept that maybe I didn't pay enough attention to the frog and, I should hit the spare action, that's on me. But I think, like, having that health cheat, really, like, sours it in my eyes. Like, he couldn't think of another way to make sure, like, he wanted people to kill her, even though the game doesn't want you to kill her. And so, like, the designer, like, jumped through a few hoops to, like, do his damnedest to make sure that you did from a bunch of different angles. It feels like it's set up against you in a lot of ways, and not in a way that feels natural for the fiction,
Yeah, the Toriel fight is... I can see that even if they wanted you to kill Toriel, it sets, you don't have to, and it shows there are different ways of finding how to protect them. However, it doesn't teach you about the sparing mechanic even if you kill her. So you kill her and you still don't learn that you can just sit here and smack spare repeatedly, and it works on some enemies. So you're just left with almost no knowledge gleaned from it, honestly. You've just killed this person that you were trying your damnedest not to, and are in not better for it, not worse for it, just in the exact same spot you were at.
See, I disagree mildly in that I think it's either way it does a good job, even though I felt a little bit used, a little bit cheated. I think it does a good job of conveying not the mechanical weight, but the emotional weight of killing that person, to the point where after that I was more on the lookout for options. Like, maybe I should have tried harder, and I think it was successful for me in doing that. But by that point, after a certain point, it doesn't really matter who you spare or not. You can't get even a decent ending, really, because you killed Toriel. I'll just say that my neutral ending ended up being, since I spared everyone else, Undyne ended up, like, taking the throne and, doubled down on Asgore's war against the humans, and was, like, made a law that, like, anyone who falls into the underground will be executed on sight, and they're gonna go, like, ravage, like, basically go start another war again.
Jesus Christ.
And like, they tell you all that in a phone call. Like, so that's not satisfying, emotionally, but, like, you can argue that, alright, choices of consequences, fine, but since there's so many different options for this game, and that one that I just outlined might be the most common one of your average, like, newcomer, you get told, especially after, again, what is not a good final boss for the neutral run, you basically just get told in this phone call that, everything is bad, and because you fucked up once at the beginning of the game, pretty much nothing else you did mattered. And that was a shitty feeling, especially when I felt like the game had to cheat to get me there,
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like, I had no idea that had so much weight to it, especially because it's the first person you really encounter that can have that much of a profound impact. Like,
yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I guess the other thing I wanted to mention, this isn't really related to death. Like, it kind of is. It's kind of related to mechanical death, but we keep alluding to this neutral run final boss, and chances are you've played the game and you know what we're talking about, and maybe even, like, disagree with us. But, like, I guess just to be clear, the Flowey, that kind of taunts you throughout the game, he's the final boss after your fight with Asgore. Even you can choose to spare Asgore, or kill him. Either way, Flowey will come in and take his soul and become, like, a generic, in many ways, just a generic, like, JRPG final boss. And you have to use, like, the power of the other 6 human souls to beat him. And Flowey, since this game is so meta, like saving your game and resetting and doing all that stuff in the fiction is treated as like you messing with the timeline. So Floey can do that too, and he like will crash your game and stuff like that. And it didn't, but since like it feels like it's out of nowhere because you don't have the context of either of the other runs, so it doesn't really feel that impressive to you that like Floey can do this. It feels more gimmicky than anything.
It's
and the
a
other
cool gimmick. I'm gonna say that. Like I enjoyed that there was some weird stuff happening with my game. I thought that was kind of neat, but.
See, I might have been able to get there, but what kept me from getting there is something we talked about much earlier, in that this final fight is so clearly trying to be Gygas from Earthbound. It is trying so hard.
So many ways, too. It is so much.
So for me, the gimmickry of like the reset and the crashing, like him messing with your game, it felt like I was seeing through it just because I'm like, all right, you're trying to do a fucked up thing like Gygas here, and it's not working. Also, just because I hated, like, he uses, the whole game is like classic, like, SNES pixel art, but that last fight is, they call him Photoshop Floey, and, he's got a bunch of weird, like, Photoshop stuff going on. It's just this mess of bullet hell, chaos, with all sorts of like Photoshop nonsense. I think it just looks terrible.
Yeah, there's a couple runs where you can end up with a little bit of photorealism to it, and it looks so out of place and just uncomfortable to look at, honestly.
Yeah, and so, but like not in a good way. Not in, like Gygas is uncomfortable, but in like a really like powerful way.
Yeah, he's upsetting in a mental way. This is upsetting in a visual way.
Yeah, something you don't ever really want, no matter what the situation is. So I guess, and if we're talking about the neutral one being unsatisfying, and that like pretty much everything between like the tutorial fight, and I didn't even feel that cheated about it. I just felt like, okay, like choices of consequences, like got it. Like I throughout the rest of the game, I very much enjoyed it. Then I came to that final boss, which I thought was really bad, especially because I thought like the Asgore fight was really good and emotional right before it. And it kind of let the air out of the balloon, and then you get that ending where like surprise, like this whole time like nothing you did mattered, and by the way, we're just gonna tell you this in like a bit of an exposition text box, so maybe I know that this game's got a lot of fans. And a lot of them will like disagree with my assessment or like tell me that due to the nature of the game it was my own fault, which to a degree maybe it is. But hopefully you can kind of see how it wasn't the most satisfying experience. Like it wasn't the kind of game that made me want to immediately go back and like see all the other options. It just made me feel like, oh, all right, well, that was like 5 hours of fun followed by like an hour of agony.
Especially because I didn't kill anyone on my playthrough. My first playthrough, I kept everybody alive. I ended up with 0 kills at all. I had heard just enough about it to know that I could avoid killing people, so I went out of my way to do so. And when I still was met with a very lukewarm ending, and like I was later told, probably a month later, that there's better endings for it, I didn't care because I had felt like, okay, I didn't kill anybody. That was the true or that was what I assumed was the true pacifist ending. I don't need to go back and see the rest. I got what I got. So I never felt in that initial playthrough like it would be worth it to go back and do the little bit that I had left to do.
You saying that actually reminded me of another thing about the neutral ending that kind of soured me, mostly a philosophical difference between me and Undertale at the time, and that you get one last choice. At least I did. I'm not sure how it works out if you spare everyone, but I'm assuming it's the same.
Yeah, it is. I know what you're going to say.
Yep. After you beat Floey and he goes back to his normal form, you are given one last choice to either kill him or let him go. And if you say spare, like you have to do it a lot of times. And Floey is like trying to get you to kill him. He's doing the Joker thing, like, come on, I want you to do it, like kill me. And the whole point is to like resist the temptation, I think. And if you do, Floey will give you a hint on how to get like the best ending. I didn't get that hint because I killed him, and I don't feel bad about that at all. because Flowey, he gains some sympathetic qualities on like a true pacifist run, but like also I didn't kill him immediately thinking like, no, like this is what he deserves. Like I killed him because if you spare him like 4 times, if you say like 4 times, he starts saying like, if you let me go, like I'm gonna go and kill everyone, and that's when I killed him. Because that feels it at that point I like raised an eyebrow at Undertale. I'm like, Undertale, you're a very sweet game, but I also feel like you're really naive if you're trying to like tell me that letting Flowey get away consequence free was the right thing to do. Like, yes, killing is bad, but what's also worse is like maybe letting a genocidal murderer like go and kill all your friends.
I powered through to letting him live just because it became a matter of not how I was on the same boat of I wanted to kill him. It felt like that would have been the better choice to do. But because I knew the way the game was played, and the problem is that I knew the way the game was played, I continued to spare him, even though, to sound a little cruel, he needed to die in the context of the game.
I mean, is that even that cruel? Because, like, if you say that, like, Hitler needed to die, like, nobody's gonna disagree with you there unless they're, like, actual Nazis. So, like, it's strange to me that... And I guess it's not strange because I know Undertale, and, like, it's a nice sentiment. And I feel like the true pacifist ending makes this case a lot better. Of that, like, being nice to everyone and, like, sparing everyone, like, and being kind to people. Like, it feels like the true pacifist ending, like, actually being legitimately kind to people is, the way to go. But, like, but with the context of the neutral ending, with that final choice to spare or kill Flowey, I'm a big Dragon Ball Z fan. And I'm just going to use this comparison because it's a criticism that gets leveled at that show and its main character a lot. Goku has a tendency to let his enemies go in that show after he's beaten them. And it's not really treated like he's being like such a smart, gracious guy, like a generous guy who's like willing to give people a second chance most of the time. Most of the time it's treated as like he's an idiot. And like the audience thinks he's an idiot for doing it. That like, if you're letting this literal genocidal murderer go and do more murdering. Like, at a certain point, if you can stop it and you don't, then you should stop it, And I guess, and so, like, like Sean, I also saw what the game was doing. I knew it wanted me to spare Flowey, but, like, again, that was just, like, a fundamental, I think, just a bit of a fundamental rift that, like, the game didn't make its themes resonate enough with me to feel like being kind and merciful to this character who didn't deserve it was the right way to go.
Plus, at the time, you were very much better at sticking on your, like, role-playing guns in video games than I was. I, at the time, was very big on completing things in the way that I would feel like would get the most results. I've since shifted to a more following what I think makes sense for the story, like of the character I'm playing, and nowadays I probably would have ended up killing Flowey, whatever you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
But at the time I was much more into, this is what I'm doing, I'm sticking by my guns.
Yeah, and I think that's another good point, because I think it's important to my reaction. I think it explains a lot about my reaction to Undertale and its themes overall, and that the things Undertale is trying to address with, like, its meta-narrative is strange to me, because I've always been that guy that'll, like, do, what he thinks is right, like, what he thinks fits with the fiction. Like, I've always been the role player. Like, that's how I play video games. And, Undertale, and when I replay a video game, it's not often to see like the rest of the outcomes. It's often just because like I just enjoy replaying things, rewatching things, re-experiencing things, because I feel like that gives you a new perspective on them. So Undertale seems to be under the impression that if I replay a video game, it's just because like I want to see all the endings. But when I play video games a second time, I will often make the same choices I did the first time for like an analytical purpose. Like when I play, if I like when I play a Telltale game, I'm not the person that's super interested in like reloading my save and picking the other option to see what happened. Like I'm that's always been me. Like, all right, I'm gonna make my choices and I'm gonna live with the consequences, which is coincidentally why I didn't save scum when I killed Toriel, like the game expected me to do, I think. So I think that makes for a good segue to start talking about the true pacifist run. And maybe our discussion of that might be a little bit shorter, just because, again, there's less death that happens in it.
Yeah, this one is a little bit more straightforward, but it is also where we introduce Kara to some degree.
Where that backstory, where that his their continued presence starts being more important, because that's where we find out that Flowey is Azrael, and we get Flowey's like entire backstory and how he's kind of lost his humanity after these terrible experiments.
Azrael being the prince of the underworld and the friend of the first human, Kara.
Yes, killed by the humans after he crossed the border to give the humans Kara's body, I believe.
I'm gonna take your word on that one. I might have missed that. I did a bunch of reading, but I know I still have plot holes on this, so...
Alright, so let's talk about the true pacifist ending, because it shifted my perspective of the game a little bit. In that, I thought it was good. It still didn't totally blow me away, just because in a lot of ways... The strange thing about the true pacifist ending is that if you do everything correctly, you're missing out on a lot of what makes Undertale kind of unique and interesting. Because yes, you do have the mechanic of sparing everyone and like the RPG where no one has to die. That's certainly novel, but otherwise, in terms of like characterization, plot structure, bosses, it really does play like a typical RPG in a lot of ways, especially with the final sequence where Flowey regains his form as Azrael, and you sort of have this big, really flashy, really cool final boss fight that ultimately comes down to like using the power you've gained from your friends along the way to defeat a big bad. It's a spirit bomb ending, as I like to call it. And every JRPG in existence is a spirit bomb ending. I think I've played like one that doesn't. I think Chrono Trigger might be the only JRPG that I've actually played where the ending didn't involve, like, summoning the power of the friends you made along the way. And don't get me wrong, like, I love that shit. Like, that's why I love JRPGs. But it wasn't exactly a novel experience. And it was just sort of riding on, like, the good characters. And so it's strange that the game treats this as, like, the best outcome in a lot of ways. Like, you do this without killing anyone. But if you don't explore the other options, then like as a work of fiction it's just not as interesting, you know? It's from like an analytical perspective, and like maybe the game is trying to say that like that kind of analysis, that kind of desire to like explore a text is wrong, but that feels like a strange, like a weird argument to make.
There's lot of kind of odd themes going on throughout this game, especially, and this is probably my big narrative sticking point that bothers me across them, is that each playthrough has some overlap in themes, but each one also feels to go against the other playthroughs, because some feels like it wants you to kind of play again and see what happens, especially with the true neutral. It's, you know, you didn't quite do it right, do it again. But then if you take the genocide route, for sure, it really discourages you from playing the game again. But there's also elements of it that it kind of makes you feel like you want to. And even in the true neutral, when you get like the ultimate ending, you still kind of feel like, all right, well, if there's that different ending, what happens if I do the opposite? And it treats you as weird, as the player, as weird and wrong for wanting to experience the other stories. And as far as just a video game goes, I don't think that that's something that should be established because you've created a work that is designed to be experienced in many ways by many people. And to say you should play it once, maybe twice, but maybe not because we're telling you not to play it again, and then put it down feels weird. It leaves, for most people, it will leave an incomplete hole in where the game should be. And that is underscored by the fact that, as Jackson and I both intoned, the neutral route feels very underwhelming.
Yeah, and it's just sort of, there's a lot of strange stuff, and that we'll get into this. But there was a pretty strong moment for me after I finished the true neutral, because obviously the intention was for me to then do the genocide right after. I loaded up the game again, and after you finish the true neutral and everyone is friends, you get Flowey. He's the only one left in the underground. Like, that's the only thing that's bittersweet, is that Azrael, like, can't keep his humanity again. Like, after you beat him, he's got to go back to being Flowey. And he says, like, hey, like, welcome back. I didn't expect to see you again, but maybe I did. Listen, I know you're thinking about doing it again and resetting everything, but, like, everyone's happy again. Like, please don't replay it. So, like, in that instance, the game doesn't want you to replay it, and if you do choose to reset, it's treated as, like, this weighty, cruel decision, because in the text of the fiction, a reset is a, like, reset of the universe. But here's the problem. It's not cruel, because they're not real. Like, if you reset versus if you don't reset, it's not like the characters are going to go, like, live their lives, like, happy or unhappy, because they aren't real. They're just writing and ideas. So, and the game tries to make you feel cruel for playing it, but it's so I guess the way I can think about it is that a lot of the problems with sort of the postmodern elements of this game is that they don't seem to correlate with any kind of mindset and reality, like, one way or another. So, like, going back to Spec Ops The Line, a game that I don't think is perfect, but I think where its intention is very clear, in that this is a game that kind of takes a look at the Call of Duties of the world, the modern military shooter genre, and is trying to, like, prod at what is appealing about this game, these kinds of games, and maybe what's sort of fucked up about someone enjoying these games. And I don't think it makes its argument completely perfectly, but at least, like, the idea lines up one-to-one with something in reality. Like, you know, we play these games because we have this desire for war, because we have this desire for death. That's kind of this primal thing within us, and it's kind of fucked up that we want to indulge in these power fantasies, right? But with Undertale treats its postmodern elements, like, with the weight and seriousness that everything is real, and then it tries to make you feel bad on the basis that, like, the stuff that's happening is actually happening, but it isn't. And that's sort of the problem. And that's why I think a lot of the ways the game tries to make you feel guilty fall flat, because, like, the central premise is a bit flawed.
And I can already hear criticisms of what we're saying coming in as, you know, suspension of disbelief. Just embrace the world and be part of it, you know, understand what they're trying to say and don't just write it off. But the problem is that video games are inherently designed to have replay value. You don't watch a movie and then go, oh, okay, they lived happily ever after. If I play it again, it's going to undo that. You'll watch a movie a second time. You'll read a book a second time. You'll play a video game a second time because you want to play it a different way or see what changes or what have you. And so,
or even just to experience it again, like, exactly the same. Like, there are a lot of games like that.
They even call that out in this game too. At one point, on the genocide run, and I quote, "You are racked with a perverted sentimentality for continually recreating this world." It's such a weird sentiment for a game to make, especially a game. If this was a standard JRPG where there was one playthrough, maybe I could see that. Especially if it was a standard JRPG with characters that you're designed to either forget about or not like, I could see that. But it's a game that is designed to have and has multiple playthroughs and incredible characters that you end up really, really liking. So to then say, just kidding, don't play this again, you weird pervert, is just mind-boggling.
And it's strange to me too, even that argument. And again, maybe this is just because like this game is attacking. Like I'm conscious of the fact that I'm being attacked, but I'm not as like a player for like doing these things. But again, I'm not really sure why, or like the game doesn't articulate why what I'm doing is bad very well, because also it just doesn't account for the fact that like. So a game that I revisit very often, that I replay quite a bit, is Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Like, I love that game. And, it is one of those where you could accuse me of having a perverted sentimentality for it, because I keep going back and playing through these same events again and again. Except, like, with games like that, and with anything, really, art is sort of a way that, like, we process the world around us. Like, it often, I know that, like, and maybe you could call it a perverted sentimentality, but I'm definitely the sort of person who like is really helped where when I encounter some like resonant themes in like a movie or a book or a game, in some sort of like work, if a work of art really speaks to me, like that helps me like navigate the world. Like there's a reason I'm like I'm talking about like this movie podcast, and I'm so like passionate about fiction and like why I write fiction, just because I feel like art is the way that helps us kind of navigate our modern world. And part of that with the replaying then is, specifically with my Ocarina of Time example, is that you could say that it's the same thing every time, and that I have this perverted sentimentality for it. But I first played that game when I was 12 years old. I'm 22 now, and I keep going back to it because I'm not the same person that I was, and it means different things to me now. So even if the content is the game of the game is the same, like what I'm actually bringing to it isn't. And I feel like, in addition to the argument just being strange, I feel like Undertale misses out on a lot of the nuance that actually comes with like replaying a thing.
Especially because like it's been 2-3 years since I played this game, and I remember, and just to speak to the beginning, a throwback to my first comment about why I'm not a big fan of this game as much as I was, but also more, is the Temmies. I enjoyed the Temmies 2-3 years ago because I thought they were kind of weird and charming, but like in an enjoyable way, and it kind of led into the goofiness of the game, and it was, I accepted it and went with it. This time, they drove me absolutely insane, and that's just 3 years apart. You're going to get different emotions and different feelings from each time you play this, and I don't understand why they are driving you so hard not to play it again, and it's bizarre.
Yeah, and I think I have one theory, because the Genocide run kind of opens up. There are a couple things about it where I can see that argument being made a bit more clearly, even though I don't think it quite lands it. But the other thing too, I guess, as far as the last thing I want to address regarding the pacifist run, because we're starting to get into genocide territory now.
Yeah.
But the last thing I wanted to address is that it's especially strange to make this argument, like what I was saying about like coming and decrying someone for wanting to re-experience a game. Especially like I can see like someone, especially maybe even someone who's like a little younger, like Undertale's True Pacifist Run is very sweet. It's very touching. It's the sort of game that makes you feel like that we have the potential to like live in a kinder world, you know? Like I think it really jumps on those. I think it really sells those feelings of like, you know, you don't have to hurt anyone. Every misunderstanding can be resolved. I think it does a better job of conveying those themes that like that final flowy choice really doesn't. And I can see someone, again, especially if they're younger, like wanting to come back and like reaffirm those like really like optimistic feelings. And and like having, and maybe in like a darker time where bad things are happening to them, like it provides some level of comfort to see like all this nice, really sweet stuff with all these great characters that they like. And it's so that's bizarre to me. And then the other thing too is that one of the last statements, maybe the last statement of the genocide run, is that this idea that you aren't above the consequences. So the other weird thing about the meta stuff in the neutral ending versus the true ending is that even though the genocide ending is trying to emphasize that choices have consequences, the pacifist ending makes it feel like it wants you to skirt around the consequences because of that earlier scene. The first time it brings up this meta element is when you have killed Toriel and you talk to her again, and she looks at you and says, like, why are you looking at me so strangely? You look like you've seen a ghost. Do you know something that I don't? And it does a good job of catching you off guard. The moment isn't condemning you, but it has a lot of weight. The whole tone of the scene feels like it's encouraging you to say, okay, you fucked up last time. Really step up your game. Figure out how to do it right. It's encouraging you to save scum in some ways. And so if the point of the genocide ending is that choices have consequences and your choice to redo this game in order to get a certain ending as consequences, then why isn't that reflected in the true ending, where just no matter how many people you killed, as long as you didn't get the genocide ending, you could even do the No Mercy run that I described and still get the true pacifist ending completely unaltered. So it's strange because the true pacifist run on itself, like, that's an entire game. Like, that's a complete thematically coherent game, but when it's side by side with everything else, that's when it gets dicey.
Yeah, it's as we've said, there's some killer problems with theme in this game. That's really only stuff that you see after you've played or watched all three main run-throughs of the game. So we're gonna jump more into theme and how it plays in with our genocide run, which, let's talk about genocide.
Before we go into the nitty-gritty of the genocide run itself, I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with what started off as a No Mercy run that I didn't even realize, and didn't bother completing once I found out it was a neutral run, to be honest, just because I know that all the neutral endings are just a phone call. But, and it's, my experience with the No Mercy run kind of paints what I saw in the genocide run in a little bit of a different light, and maybe exposes part of the problem that I have with the genocide run, and that I can almost see a version of this idea that you shouldn't replay this game, or like replaying this game in this way, even though the game gives you the option to do it, is something that it doesn't want you to do. And I had this moment of clarity when I got to Papyrus in my No Mercy run, because Papyrus is the world's biggest sweetheart, acts really all big and tough, but is just such a goon, like wouldn't be able to hurt a fly. And no matter what you do in the game, Papyrus cannot kill you. If you somehow take too much damage during his boss fight, you're reduced to 1 health, and then you're put in his shed, or at least that's what I've read. That never actually happened to me, but I've heard that's what happens.
Yeah, my first playthrough in True Neutral, I was put in his shed quite a few times.
So, Papyrus, like, in terms of the fiction, never can kill you. Not like the other characters who, like, can kill you and then you reset. He never has killing intent, and even in the actual fight, there is no special action that you have to take in order to get him to stop. No matter if you keep hitting, like, talk, no matter if you flirt with him or do whatever wacky things you can do in that fight, or even if you just keep attacking him, his health will just keep going down to the point where before you can kill him, before you can even realize, like, that he doesn't have killing intent, like, there will never be a situation where, like, you can kill him because you didn't realize that he wasn't trying to kill you. He will always have enough health left that he will offer to end the fight. So this isn't like the Toriel fight where she can die because of misunderstanding. And this isn't like the Undyne fight where you might make that calculation that, like, this is a character that's out for blood, that seriously wants to hurt you, and that, like, you can say that you're acting in self-defense. There is no good reason on this earth to kill Papyrus except because you can. And that strikes me as pretty cruel. Even though it isn't real, it feels like you legitimately feel really shitty after you've done that, especially because in the No Mercy run, everything plays out as normal. You've still gone through his wacky puzzles. You've still, like, talked to him about his silly spaghetti. It's just all the same stuff. And then at the end, he offers to be your friend, and you cut him down. And it's terrible. You might... And it really, like, leaves you, like... I was sitting there thinking, like, okay, like... maybe I'm starting to get what this game is getting at, because there was no reason for me to do that, other than because I could, other than because, like, you know, I'm doing this for the podcast, but, like, generally, like, if I was just doing a genocide run, like, just to fulfill my curiosity. And so I think that the genocide route, if it was just done, like, the No Mercy route, like, everything was normal, except it went further, it was a little emptier, like, you just cut off options, then got to the end, and then just got, like, another unsatisfying ending, like, that might have conveyed the point much better. Because the problem I have with the actual genocide route is that the genocide route isn't sad like the No Mercy route is. Like, even killing Undyne, like, who is, like, you know, coming after you, like, she, like, just struggles to hold on and is, like, doing her best to fight, and it's like, oh god, this is really terrible. But the genocide route isn't sad. The genocide route is extremely cool.
It is, like, badass as all get out. It is a really cool run. And yeah, you get a little sadness pings from when you kill these people, I would say. But overall, it's not... There are a couple of actually hard fights. For the most part, you just one-shot people, from my understanding.
Yep.
So the couple of really, really cool fights are really, really cool. And if you just continue to one-shot people, it would be different, because it would feel hollow and just walking through slaughtering people. But it's not. It is its own rewarding campaign.
In the No Mercy run, that feels like a senseless slaughter, because everything is going by and the monsters are still friendly to you. They're still treating you like an equal. But, like, part of the reason that, like, the genocide run is so cool is that everyone talks about you like you're a force of nature. Like, there's nothing behind your eyes. It's like you're just the villain. You're just playing a game where you're the villain and, like, everyone is making a heroic last stand. Like, even some of the characters that you do just one shot, like, that ends up being really badass too. Like Metaton, he ends up getting, like, a second form that you don't see before, and he's even got, like, his own remix on, like, Undyne's, like, second theme, and it's played up to be another one of those moments where, like, you get another, like, hard boss fight in a sea of just, like, senseless slaughter, but then he goes down really quickly too, and it's awesome. And, like, so, and then oh god, you get to Sans, and, like, you can't even understand the nuances of Sans' character without the genocide run. Kind of like that existential, like, depression he has about being aware of all this, like, time fuckery going on and being able to do nothing about it and just kind of resigning himself while still having a bit of, like, that meta knowledge. It adds, like, so much to his character, and the fight itself is just, like, so unique and interesting. And then, you know, you get another, like, really unique and unconventional ending, and it doesn't feel depressing to me. It feels cool.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a, if you don't, genocide runs, if you do one, will essentially fuck up your game. In that, from that point forward, the impacts of the genocide run will be seen in little ways for each future run. So, once again, kind of underscoring why you should go back and play it again to see what's changed, but neither here nor there. So before you go do a genocide run, whatever, it's cool to watch is what I'm getting at. It's a very cool run to see happen. I imagine it's very cool to play. I didn't play it just because I was spent my time to read and watch all this stuff. The one thing I will say though is it does call out people who are just watching the run in a very weirdly meta way. Is Flowey
that was interesting.
Yeah, Flowey at one point gives shit for sickos that stand around and just watch it happen, implying people like me who was watching it on YouTube to see what would happen without actually playing it.
The interesting thing to me about that moment is that Flowey specifically calls you out as not having the spine to do. He calls you a coward, basically, for watching it. And that was interesting to me because I wasn't watching it out of cowardice. I was watching it because I guess I was trying to do the genocide run and I fucked it up. And you really need to go out of your way, like really far out of your way to get it. Because even just killing everyone like I was doing that you run into, that's not enough. You need to sit there and actually like grind, like an old school like JRPG. And that's another interesting layer in that there's pretty much no way you can do a genocide run unless you know that you want to do a genocide run. You have to go out of your way.
Yeah, you have to set out for it.
And even then, like, I set out for it and still fucked it up. Because I didn't want to go read. I knew that, like, Sans was the final boss, and I knew that, like, there was a bunch of shit that happened, but I didn't know the details and didn't want to spoil myself, so I didn't look up how to do it. I just assumed that if you killed everyone, you'd be fine, and so I still fucked it up. And, that also that presents, I think, kind of another interesting layer, and that also, like, because I said that after I realized I was doing it wrong, I kind of went back and watched a YouTube video, but what I didn't mention was that I actually did go try and do it myself, and the reality of the genocide run, although all the conclusion, the final boss, the new story stuff, that's all really cool, the reality of actually doing it is actually quite boring, though. Because you just have to grind like 30 plus enemies in every area like a regular JRPG, and
then
so that
one-shot the people that were originally bosses.
That's kind of interesting to me, but it doesn't feel totally thematically coherent, I guess just because in the context of like a video game where you do certain actions and then you're rewarded with more content, the coolness of the genocide run is pretty much a reward. Like, a no mercy run of just like killing everyone is you doing bad things but not really getting rewarded for them. But even though the game is telling you one thing, like you're a sicko for playing this out to its logical extreme, it's still rewarding you with, like, the coolest final boss, like, top 10 final bosses in history. Like, 'cause that Sans fight, if you've never actually seen it, like, if you've only heard about it, it's really something. Just, in addition to all the, like, neat, that's one area where I think all the meta stuff happening is really neat. The way that fight is set up is really good. The flavor text is good. Sans' dialogue alone is fucking excellent. Like, just some of the best writing in the game, and it's such a good reward. So the game, again, doesn't want you to do it, but then rewards you for it, because even if you do something that's arguably worse, like, I would argue that the way Papyrus gets taken out on the No Mercy run feels 1,000 times crueler to me than how he does on the Genocide run, because on the No Mercy run, it's like a betrayal. Like, Papyrus puts down his guard after a long battle and, like, agrees to be friends, and you stab him in the back, basically. But on the Genocide run, you're already basically Godzilla, so you're just doing what you normally do, and that feels a lot less personal, especially considering you already probably have a relationship because you've played with that character because he's so fun and lovable. Yeah, so I guess just the little nuances between that are sort of interesting. But in the end, the Genocide run is making a statement all of its own, and that statement is undermined by the fact that you get new content.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you weren't getting any sort of new content and you just had to force yourself to grind through it just to get one-shot some people, I think it would make a much more thematically on-point statement, but I feel like overall it would... I don't know. I think it would make a much more thematically on-point statement. And yeah, we would lose some of the other elements to it, some more answers to the mysteries that this game presents. That's the other thing, is that this game presents mysteries, and each mode each run-through gives you a little bit more of an answer to them, which is another frustration. Once again, neither here nor there for previous discussions. But to have it just be cooler is weird. The one thing I do want to really quickly mention this about the Genocide Run that I don't necessarily entirely understand. Like, in hindsight, I do. But I think it's off-putting when you're doing a Genocide Run, is that a lot of the characters refer to you as just this monster, especially in the beginning, as just this monster that's just slaughtering everyone. And you are referred to as someone who wants to kill both all the monsters and all the humans, which I never felt that I got that. I got, in the beginning, I felt like the determination would be to leave this realm of monsters, especially because you are told that monsters have been sealed off. Like, why wouldn't you want them gone if you had the ability to do so? It would be an inherent mistrust from an upbringing. So to go through and kill a bunch of them feels thematically accurate for the character. When you get to Papyrus, it changes a little bit because it is someone who puts down his weapons and looks the other way, and you do kind of become much more of a monster. But I still understand where it felt like they referred to you as someone who's trying to kill humans and monsters. And I don't understand where this idea that you're trying to kill humans comes from, because it doesn't ever feel like that. It would seem like you're just trying to escape this unfamiliar world. And you would still be, to them, an absolute villain. But I don't understand where this killing of humans comes from until the end, where they're like, oh, well, you were actually possessed by Kara the whole time, and Kara hates humans and whatnot. But it still doesn't make sense to me.
I can try and wrap my head around it a little bit, just because of, as I said earlier, the level of excess that needs to be taken in order to activate the Genocide Run. And that, in a way, I think when you've gone as far as you need to go for that, to even trigger that, the justifications of the fiction stop mattering in Undertale's eyes, I think. And I think that's how the characters are wrestling with it, that they know that something is wrong with you, that they see that this isn't just because it wouldn't just be, if you've gone to like such excess of like hunting down every monster, it wouldn't just be a matter of self-defense that you were raised in. So
no,
I think
totally right. Like, as you're talking about this, I hadn't even included the fact that you do have to hunt down monsters, despite the fact that we've mentioned it like 4 times.
I think it's an easy thing to miss, especially when you're just like watching it.
Yeah.
And you're not really considering that. And also, like, because then it's not totally one-to-one either, because of course you're not going to kill the humans, because at that point the justifications of the fiction stop mattering just because you are doing this just because, and the game knows that. But I think that's just how the characters who aren't Sans, who aren't flowy, who aren't aware of kind of the meta confines, or just kind of how they're seeing it, and they're being able to try and comprehend what you're doing. It's almost like not a justification, but a way for them to try and make sense of you, which to them like wouldn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, all right, I can get behind that. It just, as I watched the playthrough of it, so it felt a little off to me. But I mean, I suppose that is a fault of watching and not playing it. So
yeah, I'm glad I actually did go through and try it and didn't immediately go into the video, because I think without having tried to do it yourself in some capacity, it's sort of hard to intrinsically understand just how tedious it is to do, and B, just how truly excessive. Like, I was still planning on doing it, but I saw that you had to kill, like, I looked up the numbers for each area, and it's like 20 monsters you have to kill in the ruins before you can trigger it. And I thought I just kept killing them, and I kept thinking, all right, this next one's gonna be it. And then more of them just keep coming, and you're like, oh my god, like, this is so many.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I think it works really well. And again, as a run, maybe it's a little more coherent as just a run on its own, because then you've destroyed this world, and Kara asks you at the end, like, to take the final step and erase it, but, like, you want to keep coming back, and there's some, like, timey-wimey nonsense, some meta reset stuff with that, and that all seems to work, and that kind of works completely as, like, this own story, you know, without even the context of the other runs. But then with the context of the other runs, it feels like nonsense. It feels like nonsense that the game... It's hard to feel guilty about it, I guess. This isn't a game that makes... There are some games that have legitimately made me feel guilty or like a bad person, like because of the themes, because of the way it's set up. Undertale is... Actually, that's not true. I did feel guilty when I killed Papyrus, but that wasn't even when I was doing a genocide run. That wasn't even when the context had changed. That was just, like, when everything was still set in stone. And I think, yeah, just the way... the two core problems... It's got three core problems, thematically. And that's a lot of core problems to have with one of your central themes. But, you know, my god, it has them. And first, you know, as you've been saying, the game actively encourages you to not just replay in order to get the best ending, but to replay and explore. And that's the key, I think. In that it would have been different if, like, the game wanted you to replay it after a neutral run to just encourage you to get the best run. It does do that, but it also explicitly, and as you were saying, implicitly in other ways, it tells you to explore the other option.
It does so, it teaches you to explore, and this is something that you wouldn't know unless you go and do some reading on it. There is this mechanic of the game known as a fun value, and it is a hidden mechanic from the player. But it's a number anywhere from 0 to 100. And depending on what number it's on, you get a different set of events that occur at certain points throughout the game. So if you end up with a fun value of 56 or something like that, there's a crossword at one point that suddenly has weird faces on it, which doesn't change that much. But if you get certain numbers of certain fun values, there are whole extra rooms added and like this weird additional mystery underlying it. It's a game that encourages replaying for exploration through its own mechanics, let alone story.
Yep, absolutely. The fun value is a really good point, because that is something I only even saw in passing. And again, to the credit of the designer, the amount of effort to go into creating all these different possible permutations, and even in the neutral run, like, all the different ways that phone call can play out depending on such precise things that you did is insane. And I think that level of attention to detail is something that should be applauded, even if, again, as we're saying, it's going against its own themes of why is the player cruel, why are we getting accused of, like, doing this? So the game rewards replaying and exploration, even though it's telling you that, like, doing so is a cruel thing to do. And why is that a cruel thing to do? That comes to our second problem, because it's, as I said earlier, it's not real. No matter how much you want to buy into it. Again, I'm the biggest role player in the world. Like, I love treating the events of a game, like, really seriously and really trying to engage with it on that level. But in the end, it's impossible. You can make me feel, like, sympathy for a non-existent person. You can make me feel empathy for a non-existent person, but you can't make me feel responsible for a non-existent person. And that's troubling, especially when there is no clear correlation to something in the real world. And anything that is just sounds more troubling in the first place. I saw this discussion happening on Twitter. I don't remember who exactly made this tweet. I believe it was a film critic. But they identified something they called the Antigone problem. And, that's a reference like a really old Greek tragedy, but basically the problem is that when you have something in fiction that addresses a theme or tries to make a statement or some sort of moral judgment that doesn't correlate to anything someone in the real world can experience. Or maybe a better example might be there's, I believe, a Star Trek movie where the theme in the end ends up being about like saving space whales. When art fiction is allowed and even encouraged, of course, to have like a bunch of fantasy elements, a bunch of stuff that can't and doesn't happen in real life, but thematically the emotional core of it should still ring true to like some aspect of the human experience. So to use like a really basic example, that's, honestly kind of heavy-handed, but still like addresses it. District 9 is a movie that's about aliens, but you can tell like through the way that it's shot, through the way the characters are composed, it's really supposed to be like an allegory about like apartheid. And so even though you have like this thing that doesn't exist, or maybe aliens do exist but we haven't had like contact with them or whatever, some element that is fiction, it's still addressing something that is identifiable and real and happened throughout history. And even though it might be doing it in kind of a heavy-handed way, it's still doing it, as opposed to Undertale, where you can say, all right, what's it about? Choices have consequences? Well, I mean, sure, but they don't really have consequences because this is a video game. Like, what action? People don't play video games the way they act in real life. And that divide is something that a lot of designers will explore, but I think the reason it's so difficult to make this kind of postmodern game work so well is that you have to really get at like the emotional core of like what's troubling about something we do in a video game. Like you have to really address, like, again, in something like Spec Ops: The Line, one of the more effective things that game does, it ties its plot really well into like American foreign policy, this recent tendency, or maybe not so recent, to go like invade other places and like try and make things right because they're the world police, they're America. Like it's grounding it in this like global policy while still keeping those themes of interventionism in the game. And so it's not just saying shooting people in this video game is bad because they're fictional people, because oh no, like killing is bad. It's trying to root it to mix results with something that actually happens in the real world. But Undertale relies entirely on the fiction. It doesn't. I'm honestly like really struggling to think like I can't think of an element that it's accusing you of, especially because the act of killing doesn't seem to be what Undertale takes so much umbrage with, but it's the fact that you can kill and do whatever you want just because you can. And it's like, all right, maybe that's the central theme. Just because there are certain things you can do doesn't mean that you should. But A, as we've been saying, the game rewards you for doing them. And B, it's just not clear how that would apply to someone's life in any sort of meaningful manner. Like, obviously, we're not going to, do these kind of terrible things that happened in the genocide run. It's just so far beyond the realm of, like, actual human experience that it rings a little bit hollow as anything other than just a demonstration of what you can do with, like, choice mechanics and, like, meta-narrative. It feels kind of purposefully showy. And I think that's sort of what makes any sort of accusation or a moral judgment against the player for doing it ring really false.
See, here's what I'm going to kind of bounce off on what you were saying, is that you mentioned that you felt bad for killing Papyrus, which is a emotional response to something that occurs in genocide or no mercy runs. So the game still has the ability to make you feel bad for your actions. The problem is that what it's trying to really make you feel bad for is replaying the game.
Yes.
And the reason it doesn't work, I think, is because you create an emotional attachment to the game. However, you know that resetting the game doesn't actually remove the characters from the game. Killing a character okay, so if you kill Papyrus, he is removed from the rest of the run in that game. He's gone and just dead. And if you're trying to make someone feel bad for resetting a game, you're trying to make them feel bad for bringing back people that they killed. Because these are all people that have been removed from that run. So to reset it, to play it again, you get to bring them all back. Now, if you say you're resetting it to kill them all again, you have a little bit of a more of a leeway. But it's different because you don't have that emotional attachment to a reset game. It's rough killing Papyrus because you have created an emotional attachment in this intimate one-on-one battle. You don't have this attachment to the world. You have the attachment to the characters within it.
Yes.
So to force you to feel bad about resetting misses the mark of what makes you feel bad in video games.
Absolutely. It stops being about the death and thinking about, yeah, it's making you feel bad about resetting and like toying with these people. That's what's trying to make you feel bad about toying with these non-existent people. And then we can try and think about like, okay, what does that apply to, like, morally? Like what maybe can resetting the game serve as like an allegory for in like real life, and like toying with these people. And it doesn't need to be heavy-handed like my District 9 example. It just needs to be something for me to latch onto that like rings true emotionally. But the problem is that like in order for like Undertale's emotional like guilt trip to work, you need to have that kind of power in real life. You basically need to be God in order for Undertale to make you feel bad about it, because otherwise it's just a game and it's not real anyway. And so yeah, I think what you said is just absolutely correct. There's a reason that to maybe like look at why you killed Papyrus, like step back and think about like, oh God, like I killed this character who didn't fucking deserve it in any way, not even close. Like, I feel terrible about that. Let's examine why. And I feel like that's a good jumping off point for maybe some theoretical genocide run. But that's not really the route the genocide run takes, because the thing about killing Papyrus is that it's meaningless. You don't get anything out of it. He's no threat to you. He's nothing. It's in fact, you don't get anything. Like, you lose like a character that you love. So you can do it, but it's meaningless. And I guess, I said this earlier, but it really maybe would have been 1,000 times thematically more coherent if like you just got to the end of the genocide run and nothing happened. Like, you can do it, but why?
It's so weird to have such an interesting thing hidden behind this run that's supposed to make you feel terrible, and it makes sense going throughout it as well that you get it's a slog, it's insta kills, and like we've talked about this, so I'm just lightly recapping. The fact that you still get something interesting and new out of it is unfortunate and against its theme. And since we are starting into recap territory, I think it's probably time to start wrapping this up. I do feel like we've pretty much said what we wanted to say. I'm sure there's a lot more that could be said that we haven't really gotten on, but I think we've covered the core issues.
I mean, and, again, coming back around to the general feeling about Undertale, the fact that this was like our first 2-hour episode, I think is a testament to how complex this game really is. And even if that complexity is often because of messiness, I think that ambition is something that we could do with more of in the games industry, pretty much. And I think we can aspire to be as bold as Undertale is and be working with all these layers. So yeah, even though we spent quite a large amount of time being very critical to this game, I am certainly glad that I played it, and I'm certainly glad that I've had the chance to sort of, even if its ideas weren't completely coherent to me, I'm glad that I was able to consider them and really let it all sink in with me.
It's an important game. It's a game that I'm very happy exists. It's a game I'm very happy I've played, and it's a game that, honestly, everyone should play, even if you aren't really big into video games, because it works very well on many levels, and it's not a hard-to-access game. So, like, if you've listened to all this, seriously, go play it. Go play it.
And you know what? If you haven't played it in a while and thinking about all this has made you want to revisit it, then don't listen to Undertale. Play Undertale again.
Yeah, seriously, go play it. That being said, I'm Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. You can also find me streaming. I'm streaming more now. I'm usually doing Wednesdays and Sundays. Sundays, I'm open to having other people join us. We play a variety of games. I'm on Twitch at twitch.tv/helpless_Skippy.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me over on Twitter at JacksonJKeller, where often be incoherent ramblings about stuff we are going to be talking about in the podcast in the future. So if you want some insight into what we're going to be talking about, that is a good place to get it.
If you want to stay up to date with what we're doing, we're going to keep updating and having conversations with people. Go follow the podcast on Twitter at BADH_cast. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/BADHcast. And go rate us a review on iTunes. Go tell us how we're doing. Talk to us. Tell a friend. Let other people know. If you like what we're doing, you should tell other people. That being said, next week we're going to be talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the first 9 episodes, which is The Phantom Blood.
Oh, I'm real excited for this one.
This is like Jackson's baby, so it's gonna be a good one. I like this show. I like these first 9 episodes quite a bit. So go watch that. It's a wild ride. You're in for a wild ride. Join us. Join us. Join us. And please remember the wise words of Sans. Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go